And now we are doing chapter 13, verse 1. Every true prophet who wants to live among you is entitled to his sustenance. Likewise, a true teacher is also entitled, just as the worker is entitled to his sustenance. Therefore, you shall take every first part of the produce of the winepress and the threshing floor, and of both cattle and sheep, and give it to the prophets, because they are your high priests. But if you do not have a prophet, give it to the poor. When you make a batch of bread dough, take the first part and give it according to the commandment. Likewise, when you open a vessel of wine or oil, take the first part and give it to the prophets. Also of money and clothing and any other possession, take the first part as it seems fitting to you and give it according to the commandment. Very interesting. Okay, so here's the overview. The chapter offers practical halachic advice on fulfilling the master's mandate that the laborer deserves his food. Matthew 10 verse 10. Establishing the system of gifts for prophets and teachers ensures that the community would provide for the needs of its leaders. And it gave the Gentile believers of the diaspora a way to participate in the Torah's commandments regarding the priestly gifts. So we know about the priestly gifts. You're supposed to give all the stuff. Your first of everything goes to the Kohanim. Now, Yeshua says that those who provide for the needs of his disciples receive a reward of prophets and righteous men. That's Matthew 10. He says, the one who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And the one who receives a righteous person because he is a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. The apostles interpreted the master's teaching about a laborer deserving his wages to mean that community elders who serve well and labor in preaching and teaching should receive the double honor of compensation for their efforts. Paul cites the teaching of Yeshua to establish this principle in 1 Timothy chapter 5:17. It says, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of a double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wages. In a similar passage that makes an obvious allusion to Yeshua's teaching, the apostle Paul invokes the master's injunction about paying a laborer in order to justify his own right to community support from the congregation in which he taught. It says in 1 Corinthians 9, the plowman should plow in hope, and the thresher should thresh in hope of sharing in the crop. If we have sown spiritual things among you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? If others share this rightful claim on you, do not we even more? Whenever I read that thing, where they talk about that we have sown spiritual things among you, should we not receive then material rewards for it? I think of these guys like First Fruits of Zion that publish all these books and make the Torah Club and stuff. People think, if you can just pass it around for free, if it's a PDF, if you can just watch for free, it's fine. It's the word of God, you've got to share it. It's like, no. The Bible says they've done actual work. They've planted within you spiritual stuff, and they've worked hard to prepare the stuff and put the resources together. So what does Paul say here? Is it too much if we reap material things from you? So that's stealing, hey? Copyright is one of the biggest versions of theft, I think, in the modern world today. Further on in the same discussion, I want to say something.
One that people get away with very easily.
Yeah. Paul compares teachers of the gospel to priests at work in the temple. Just as the priests received compensation for their service in the temple in the form of sustenance derived from the sacred service, so too the proclaimers of the gospel should receive their living from the proclamation of the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9:13, do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? Remember, we spoke about this last night, the peace offering. Everyone eats of the peace offering. That's why it's called the peace offering. Peace for me, peace for you, peace for him. Right? In the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9:13. Didache chapter 13 takes this analogy a step further by stating that teachers and prophets were entitled to community support because they were the community's high priests. Now, when you say that immediately, first of all, you're thinking, whoa, wait a minute. Sounds a bit like replacement theology. Yeah? They're not trying to do replacement theology. They're like your high priests. So, tithing. Let's talk about tithing. The principle of tithing first appeared when Abraham met the mysterious Melchizedek, right? The Hebrew word for tithing is ma'aser, which literally means a 10th part. The number 10 in Hebrew is the word eser. So, ma'aser is tithing. Later on in Genesis.
Of the 10.
Yeah.
Of 10.
Yeah.
That's what it basically
Tenth, it's just tenth basically. Tenth part. Later on in Genesis, we see Jacob promises God that if he will keep him safe and provide for him, Jacob will give a full tenth back to God. Genesis 28. It was not until the Torah was given at Sinai that specific regulations on tithing were delivered. So it existed long before Sinai, but the laws only came about on Mount Sinai. So there's different types of tithings, right? The first part. The readers of the Didache might naturally assume that the legislation in chapter 13 imposes a system of tithing. But on closer examination, the reader will realize that the chapter does not refer to the gifts that are set aside for prophets and teachers as tithes. Because the usual Greek word for tithes is the word apodekatao. But the Didache uses a different term. It uses the term aparche. Nothing to do with the Native Americans, the Apaches. Aparche means the first part. It's kind of like Afrikaans, aparti. Aparki. Yeah. The Septuagint uses the word aparche for both your teruma offering and your first fruits, reshit. In turn, there are three main possible meanings of the word aparche here in the Didache. So either aparche here is referring to teruma offering, which is your initial first part offering that's given to the priest. So that's a mitzvah from the Torah. Your teruma goes to the priest. Then comes your bikurim, your first fruits. First parts of your crops after your teruma has been removed. That's offered in Jerusalem. So, if you've got, let's say you've got a field of wheat. The first thing you do is you take out some and give it to the priests. Then you take out another section of your first fruits that goes to Jerusalem. And then the third one is ma'aser. That's a tithe. Then you take out 10% that's given to the Levites. Remember, if you're a farmer in Israel, your tithing on a yearly basis was minimum 22% of your income, not 10%. 10% is one of the tithes. There were at least 2.5 tithes / 3 tithes that you would give in Jerusalem when the temple was standing. Now, despite the semantic flexibility, the word aparche here seems to have a specific meaning in the Didache. The context indicates that the Didache uses the parche as an equivalent for the Hebrew term teruma, that sacred first part portions that were offered to the Levitical priests, rather than the 10% tithe or ma'aser. Before the Israelite removed any tithes from his new crops, he would remove a first part portion for the priests, which was called teruma gedola, or just plain teruma. The sages derived a rule of thumb from Ezekiel chapter 45 verse 13 for measuring how much teruma should be. They understood the Hebrew to imply that a person must set aside at least 1/60th of his entire produce, which is a legally insignificant amount of the whole, as your teruma. This was the minimum amount, but a generous person could give more. In reality, the Torah does not specify an actual amount necessary to fulfill the law of giving teruma to the priests. That's why I said it was 22%. So it was 10% plus 10% plus 2%, which is like, 60th, right? Almost. Well, not 1/60th, but...
How was it 10% plus 10%? Wasn't it 10% for one purpose in some years and 10% for another purpose in other years?
Yeah. So in the third year and the sixth year... No, it's Maaser Rishon and Maaser Sheni. There are two 10% that you give.
Yeah.
And then the Sheni one, in certain years, changes. It's not a tithe that you give. You use that 10% to the poor and to the widow and the orphan in year 3 and year 6 of the 7-year cycle. So I think that one, it's called Maaser Oni for the poor.
So every year it was a 10% and a 10%. And on third year and sixth year, this other 10% is set aside for...
It rather goes to a different place, but you still give it. Plus your teruma.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine.
10 plus minimum
so the
2.
first 10% went to the Levites.
Yeah.
The second 10% went where? In years 2 and 3? Sorry. 1.
Yeah. 1 and
2.
I believe it went to temple. Let me think this one through. No. The second one you use for yourself in the festivals. You save it up for your pilgrimages.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes.
So what happened on the third year? Then you've got no food to eat because you've given it to the widow and the...
It looks like it, yeah. I think so, yeah. I think so. So you can't party in the third and sixth year.
Oh, so just what you plant in that.
That doesn't sound right.
It doesn't sound right, yeah. What, you want to party, John?
He wants to eat.
He wants to eat. Yeah.
Sorry, you see.
I think just in the third or what is in that third year with the increase. So if you planted something in the sixth year, it's only going to ripen after that.
Yeah, but that's what your crops. We're talking about donations to the poor now. Yeah. All right. In reality, the Torah does not specify an actual amount necessary for the law of giving terumah to the priests. This fits with the Didache's injunction that you should give as seems fitting. In fact, the amount of terumah a person chose to give provided a sort of barometer to indicate his generosity. This is what the Talmud says. The Talmud's got a whole tractate on this called Tractate Terumot. It says, this is the amount of terumah the man with a good eye, a generous man, gives. He gives a 40th. Beit Shammai says he gives 1/30th. The average man gives 1/50th, and the man with a bad eye, the stingy guy, gives 1/60th. It's kind of harsh to call someone who actually gives stingy. Some people don't give at all. So it says the guy that gives a 60th is, at least he gives. The man with a bad eye, stingy eye, gives a 60th.
Right, you couldn't say yourself giving.
Yeah. Didache chapter 13 obviously is not discussing the Torah laws of giving one's first fruits, your bikurim. Because in Jewish law, first fruits were to be taken from the 7 species of Israel. Your wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. Also, the law did not apply outside of the land of Israel. Furthermore, in the Torah, the first fruits had to be brought to Jerusalem, whereas your tithes, which included terumah, could be distributed anywhere. In the Didache, prophets who receive the first part are said to be the believers' high priest. In turn, something akin to a terumah best fits this context. So that seems to be what the Didache is talking about here. Now, what about this halacha for Gentiles? Some scholars interpret this as a replacement of the Levitical system, but the New Testament does not teach substitution or replacement of the Old Testament laws and institutions, as Christian interpretation usually assumes. In fact, the Master did not even take issue with the Pharisees' extension of the laws of tithing to include things like mint, dill, and cumin, so long as they did not subvert the weightier matters of the law. Rather, Yeshua says, these you ought to have done without neglecting the others. So Yeshua actually encourages going beyond the letter of the law with tithing, because these guys were trying to be ultra pious and tithing mint, dill, and cumin, which is not even required. And Yeshua said, yeah, you should do that as well, but don't neglect the first tithes you're supposed to be doing in the first place as well. Do all of them plus the extras, Yeshua says. So why did the Didache direct its readers to give their gifts to prophets and teachers rather than to Levitical priests? It must be remembered that the Didache was written to Gentile believers in Messiah who lived in the diaspora outside of Israel. Many of these communities in which the Gentile believers lived did not have qualified Levitical priests to whom your terumah could be paid.
So
do we have any Levitical priests in our congregation?
You don't necessarily tithe your whole salary in today's terms.
Your whole salary, no?
No, like you take literally 10% of what you get every, because that doesn't necessarily just be used to buy meat and grain and all that.
I'm confused.
No, so like you'd have a certain amount that you use to buy your produce, and then you'll have a certain amount goes to other stuff, house, electricity, and all that sort of stuff. So only a certain amount of your salary is used for.
Yeah. Of the increase. Yeah.
So
of your increase.
The other stuff that you pay, technically, returning today, you don't say tithe that.
After tax, After tax as well. So first work out all that stuff, and then if you've got anything left over, increase, from that you tithe. It's very complex actually to work it out. You must get yourself an accountant to work out your tithes. Because the Pirkei Avot comes along and says, don't play the guessing game when you're doing your tithe. Be very precise. I didn't enjoy accounting at school. I still don't enjoy it.
I still think, but I think on the other side of it, like just also, I mean, you want to make sure that you meet the minimum.
Yeah.
But going after that, I think.
Then you must guesstimate afterwards. As long as you hit the minimum, then you can add more and more. Yeah. Okay, so this tithing legislation of Judaism is here artfully adopted for Gentiles in the Didache. In this way, the Didache reinterprets the terumah commandments of the Torah and makes them applicable to these non-Jewish initiates. Even the twice repeated phrase that says, according to the commandment, points us towards a loyalty to Judaism and the Torah, not a separation from the laws of the Torah. Okay, it says, from prophets to priests. Now, the prophets spoken of in chapter 13 are those that have been verified prophets who have been tested according to chapter 11. It says, you shall take every first part and give it to the prophets because they are your high priests. The Didache places prophets and teachers in the Gentile communities in a position of honor and entitlement that Judaism reserved for the Aaronic priesthood. Like the priests, the prophets and teachers receive the first honor of leading the grace after meals. We spoke about that recently, right? And like the priests, they were to receive support in the form of tithes from the community. Additionally, we find a biblical precedent for giving prophets and tithes and first fruits. Of course, with the story in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 42. A man came from Baal Shalishah, bringing the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and fresh ears of grain in his sack. The man of God was Elisha the prophet, and he was given first fruits. Of course, we find it earlier, of course, with Abraham, with Melchizedek, and Jacob to God as well. So what's a practical application for us? Ideally, Messianic Jews should follow the Torah's laws as they are interpreted today in modern Jewish law. Messianic Gentiles would do well to adhere to the injunctions of Didache chapter 13. The early church seems to have maintained a 10% system similar to tithing legislation as well. Interestingly, Oregon had already commanded that the priestly gifts mentioned in the Torah are among those commandments which were not to be abolished, that even Christians are obligated to observe in their fashion. I love this. Whenever people leave the church because the pastor teaches you that the Torah is done away with, people love to tell the pastor, oh, what about the commandment to tithe? And they say, no, that one still applies. It's funny, actually.
Very conveniently.
Yeah.
But then the argument is, yeah, but
They get it from Oregon. He did it first.
It's found in the New Testament, that's why.
Yeah, where?
Well, Yeshua tells us what.
Hebrews.
Oh, okay. No, well, yeah, okay. All right. Now, both Jewish and Christian tradition, well, so is the Sabbath, by the way. Well, that they've done away with.
They've changed it completely.
Yeah, you see, selective preaching. Both Jewish and Christian tradition have set the percentage at 10% in imitation of the biblical laws of the tithe. Yet the Didache leaves it at, take the first part as it seems fitting to you. The Didache assumes an agricultural economy in which people were accustomed to trading in crops, livestock, and produce. If the Didache were to be written for today's readers, the apostles would tell us to give a percentage of your income to support your teachers, your Bible teaching ministries, your local assemblies, and the poor among us. In Judaism today, we refer to that as ma'aser kesafim, because we don't trade in plants and stuff and animals anymore. We trade nowadays in money, right? So your bank account. So kesafim is basically the word for silver or money.
Still the whole.
So you still tithe from your money.
Yeah, but still the whole of your. Still one of the.
No, not the whole of your money. 10% of your increase.
No. What I mean is you take 10% of your whole salary.
After your costs and your taxes and stuff and your medical aid. No, medical aid is part of your salary, yeah, after that. So after the stuff that you need, of your increase, that 10%. No, of your increase, from that you take 10%.
So for example, if you've got 1,000 rand, and then you pay then your
all your living costs together,
living costs and all that, and then
700, let's say that all costs 700, and you got 300 left.
At least all of your living costs.
I was actually thinking 300, by the way.
That
So then
counts
50 rand of that.
Yeah.
all your living costs that come towards the production of income.
Yeah.
So if you need this, let's say you've got 5 cars, but this is the car that you need to get to work.
That's the one that you work out. So the living cost, the Talmud actually talks about that. What is the living cost? It's the living cost of an average person. So if you live in Sandton and you've got 20 cars, you don't get to work that out as living cost. That's not living cost, that's luxury. Mm-hmm. So you must work out the average living cost of a person, and then from that subtract what you've got and what you've spent, and 10% of that you must tithe. Actually 22%, but anyway. Today we follow the 10% as a guide. All right, let's get into the commentary. Every true prophet who wants to live among you is entitled to his sustenance. Now, the prophets and teachers that the Didache has in view here are those who function as leaders and clergy over the local community. But the description here of true indicates that I was just realizing now, when we're talking about the tithing stuff, it's different than this. This is not talking about tithing. Mm-hmm. This is talking about gifts to your teachers, which is like teruma. Okay. The tithing stuff is completely separate laws. That we give like to the community, like to the shul, you tithe to the shul. That's that. This is completely separate. This is to your teachers and your prophets.
So that's part of the second 10% basically.
No. This is from another thing called teruma, which is before the 10% we even calculated. The first part of everything you would give to the local Kohen. So we're going to read it now. We'll work it out now. The Challah is a perfect example that will help you understand it. We'll get to it now when we talk about the Challah. Okay, so the description of true prophet here indicates that he first has to be tested and proven worthy of the title prophet before being allowed to stay permanently. How do you know that? By his conduct. As followers of the Master, we are to provide for and take care of those who nourish us spiritually. Verse 2. Likewise, a true teacher, rabbi, is also entitled just as the worker is entitled to his sustenance. Once again, the descriptive word true here is applied, indicating the teacher must be proven. Once the community has tested and proven him as a teacher of truth, its members were supposed to support him for his service. Verse 3, therefore you shall take every first part and give it to the prophets, because they are your high priests. Verse 3 continues, you shall take every first part of the produce of your winepress and threshing floor, and both your cattle and your sheep. It only applies today if you own a little plot in the Karoo with your sheep.
Yeah.
None of us own that nowadays. The Apostolic Constitutions adds a blessing for obedience, similar to Deuteronomy's blessings for this as well. Listen to this. Apostolic Constitution says this. Every part of the produce of the winepress, the threshing floor of both the oxen and the sheep, you shall give to the priests, that your storehouse, so that your storehouses and garners and the produce of your land may be blessed. And you may be strengthened with grain and wine and oil, and the herds of your cattle and flocks of your sheep may be increased. This week's parasha talks about that. This is the Torah's version of the Deuteronomy 11:13. It's part of the Shema as well. If you will indeed obey my commandments, then the Lord your God will give rain to your land in its season, the early and late rain, and you shall gather in your grain, wine, and oil. And he will give grass in your fields for your cattle, and you shall eat and be satisfied. So the general principle is that the Lord should be honored with a portion from the blessing that he has bestowed upon his people, and that the prophets and the teachers are the ones who are the recipients of those gifts that we give to the Lord. Verse 4, but if you do not have a prophet, then you shall give it to the poor. This principle seems to be based in part on the Torah's commandment to give your second tithe to the poor. Ma'aser oni is for the poor in the 3rd and 6th years of the sabbatical cycle. Right? They didn't come up with this idea that you must give it to the poor just because they felt sorry for the poor in the Didache. They're basing it upon the Torah commandment once again. The Apostolic Constitutions turns this into a general prescription to give a tithe to the needy. It says you shall give a tenth of your increase to the orphan and to the widow and to the poor and to the stranger. If you know anyone who's an orphan, widow, poor or stranger, take it upon yourself to help that person. We all know people like this. We need to help them out. When you make a batch of bread dough, this is now verse 5. When you make a batch of bread, take the first part and give it according to the commandment. So this commandment to take the first part of your batch of your bread dough finds its context in the Torah's commandment of Challah. The word Challah literally means portion. It doesn't mean the beautiful bread that's intertwined that we have on Friday night. Challah means portion, which is a form of your terumah. Originally, when the temple was still standing in Jerusalem, a portion of each batch of dough that you would make was given to the priests. So when you make a batch of dough, you would always cut out one corner, set it aside. I'm going to give that to the priest when I see him later at the end of the day, when he comes back from work or whatever, when I go to his class that he's teaching. Uncooked or cooked.
Oh, okay.
You can give it either uncooked, you can give it cooked as wafers, you can give it as matzah. Find out by your local priest what his favorite is.
Okay.
This allowed even the non-farmer to offer up a sort of first fruits. This commandment was considered so important that its performance is said by the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 44 verse 30 to cause a blessing to rest on your house when you obey this commandment. That's why it's so important for women to do challah properly in the house, because if they don't do that properly, there's no blessing throughout the week on your household. That's why we make such a big deal of this being one of the mitzvahs for women. Additionally, because the challah portion had the status of priestly terumah, the priests could not eat it unless they were in a state of ritual purity. After the destruction of the temple, when the priesthood was no longer Levitically fit to receive the challah portion, the custom started of destroying your challah portion instead of giving it to them because they can't eat it in the first place. And that is still practiced till today by observant Jews and their Swedish wives. So, so do you understand the concept here? Because it was meant to be given as a priestly function in the temple, they're only allowed to eat it in a state of ritual purity, because it's an offering unto Hashem. But now that the temple's not standing, they can't be ritually pure because we don't have the sprinkling water anymore. So they're not allowed to eat of it today anyway. So the point is to give it to them today because they're just going to have to destroy it anyway. So what happens today is that when you're making challah, you take apart this section and there's actually like a blessing you say, saying, it's called Hashrafat. I can't remember. That's my wife. Anyway, the separation of the challah. I think it's Hashrafat. Hashrafat challah, you take it away and you say a blessing saying this is for challah, basically.
And then you burn it.
Yeah, so after you've burnt it in the oven, so you with the rest of the dough, then you make your challah and everything, and you put this one in the oven as well, and you burn it to a crisp so that it's inedible.
Yes.
The reason why it must be inedible is because it represents this offering to Hashem that's supposed to be only in the temple. And there's a mitzvah in the Torah that says you're not allowed to give something that's been dedicated to the temple to someone else or even to animals.
Yeah.
So the problem is, if you burn that thing now, and it's not completely burnt, if you just throw it in the dustbin, a raccoon can come into your dustbin, a bird can come and peck in your dustbin and eat that, and then they've eaten something that was being dedicated to Hashem. So you have to burn it to a crisp, and then you wrap it in like foil, so that the animal won't get in there. Do as much as you can so that the animal won't get in there and eat it as well. And then you eventually throw it away today. When the temple gets rebuilt, then every time we bake bread, we're going to have to cut off a piece and give it to your local Kohen.
Okay.
So now this is supposed to
Yeah,
go
that
to the
makes
teachers.
sense.
So this is supposed to go to the teachers in the Gentile communities, not the Kohens. Yeah. So I don't know if you bake bread very often, John.
Yeah.
So if you buy French fries at McDonald's, you have to give your rabbi 3 of the French fries in the box.
Oh,
There you go.
even a rabbit.
Even a rabbit? No. What's that joke?
Smack you for that.
A priest, the imam, and a rabbit walk into a bar. The rabbit says, "I think I'm a typo." Okay. Because the challah portion had the status of priestly teruma, I've read that already. Okay, so if the Didache is referencing challah over here, this indicates that it seeks to reapply the commandment of challah for Gentiles who are not otherwise obligated to this Torah injunction. When the temple does stand, a Kohen's not allowed to take bread from a Gentile house, technically. Oh, is he? Ooh. That's a good question. I don't know. Because it's just grain, that should be fine. Oh, yeah. So none of the Gentile offerings, as far as I know. As a Gentile, you're allowed to bring 2 offerings to the temple. The burnt offering that gets completely burnt up. Mm-hmm. And the olah.
Hola.
The olah is the burnt offering, isn't it?
Hola.
Why am I so confused right now? There's 2 offerings you can bring. I don't think the priests eat from either of them. So then I guess that'll be the case. Yeah, they won't accept it from you in the first place when the temple comes. Yeah, we'll see when we get there. We'll figure that out when Messiah is here. Okay, verse 6 says, "Likewise, when you open a vessel of wine or oil, or your McDonald's fries, take the first part and give it to your prophets." Of your wine and your oil. So the first glass that gets poured from the wine bottle, you must give to your teachers, right? It's fine. If you consider me your teacher, I'll take Coca-Cola, not wine. By commanding the Gentiles to take the first part of the vessel, or wine or oil, the Didache's legislation allowed the non-farmer to participate in the commandment of teruma as well. He too desired to give thanks to God for his bountiful provision and to take care of the prophets and the teachers. Now verse 7 says, "Also of money and clothing and any other possession, take the first part as it seems fitting to you and give it according to the commandment." Now, this could be a general injunction to give to the prophets and the teachers from all of your income and possessions. As with the commandment to give the first part of dough, this was also to be done according to the mitzvah, it says. The commandment refers to the Torah, namely that everyone is obligated to give a tithe of his income to charity. Although most of the Torah's injunctions on tithing involve agricultural produce, by the Second Temple period, the sages of Israel began extending tithing to your actual financial income, ma'aser kesafim. We find evidence of this practice in Yeshua's parable about the Pharisees and the tax collector, in which the Pharisee declares, "I give tithes of all that I get." The Midrash Shifrei finds support for tithing beyond agriculture as well. It says, "You shall definitely tithe all your agricultural produce which comes forth in the field every year." From this we could deduce that only agricultural produce must be tithed. How can we deduce from this text that it applies to loan interest, to trading, and to all other profits? From the word kol, in Hebrew there, all. For the verse could have stated you should tithe from your agricultural produce. Instead, it says you should tithe from all your agricultural produce. This includes your loan interest, your trading, and all other profits.
Okay, so yours.
So of everything. The Didache adds the qualifying instruction that you should take the first part as it seems fitting to you. That is to say that there is no fixed amount for this that you give to your teachers and your prophets. This is reminiscent of the Mishnaic axiom, which says these are matters that do not have a specific limit. The corner of the field, your first fruits, your pilgrimages, your acts of generosity, and your Torah studies. With the blessing we say every morning before we start our prayers. In conclusion, the Didache system of tithing, everyone was to give a first part regardless of whether they were farmers, bakers, or day laborers. In this way, the Didache expands and modifies the Torah's system of priestly gifts to adapt it to the Gentile believers living in the diaspora, allowing them to participate in this important set of commandments. The commentator Thomas O'Loughlin comments, among the Jews, this offering was a way of both honoring God for his goodness and of supporting the praise of God through supporting the priesthood. Now in the Didache, it's carrying on these two functions. It praises God and supports the work of the prophets who seem to have inherited the rights of the high priest. You know, I think often of Yochanan that preaches up here every Saturday with a car, and Shiva preaches up here every Saturday with a car full of veggies and hands it out. It's that same principle. You know, not all of us live on a farm and a plot that can do that, but it's the same principle. It's actually fantastic to see it in play. So that was this chapter.
So, Sydney, the Teruma portion is supposed to be burnt now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that converted into money and benefiting some?
You can burn your money. I don't know.
Because they say
Yeah.
that to you.
So remember that was something that they brought in later. So in temple times you would have to burn it because of it must be consumed within the temple in ritual purity.
Even now Jewish people burn that portion.
Yes, not because it's a mitzvah, because it's to guard the idea of the mitzvah when the temple gets rebuilt.
Exactly. But then the idea was that nobody else should benefit.
Yeah.
Right. Now if you convert that into money and give it to somebody is benefiting.
Yeah, but it's not something that's prohibited. So I think we have to separate between the mitzvah and the custom. I think today's burning is a custom to help us keep in mind the idea of what it was in the temple. But that even your dough today, if you don't separate the dough today, you're not breaking the commandment.
Traditionally, I mean, the priest would be eating the stuff, right?
Yeah.
Traditionally.
Definitely, yeah. So you don't have to necessarily burn anything today. It's a custom. Challah is a custom. So if you can, make sure someone benefits from it today. I think so.
And the
That's an
wine,
interesting question.
pour it somewhere, maybe first glass or something.
I have no idea how to do that. That's a strange one. Wine and your oil, your extra virgin olive oil. I guess they would probably then keep it in a smaller container. Haven't you seen in the music videos where they drop out for my homies on the ground? it's the same idea. Your homie must be your local teacher.
So every week there's the halal portion that's separated, is it?
Every Friday.
Every Friday.
But in temple times it had to be with every time you baked. Every piece of dough that you bake, you take off a piece. That way, because remember the priests weren't allowed to have a regular job. So they would have to eat, they don't eat once a week, they eat every day of the week. So every day when you bake your bread, because that was the thing, every day you would bake bread for your family. Today we don't have to because we buy all this GMO stuff that lasts forever. Back then you would every day bake a new bread for the family and then you would give to the priest as well.
So if you're living in the Galilee, how would that work? Because wouldn't you have to bring this to Jerusalem?
No. Remember the priests worked in shifts during the year.
Yeah.
So majority of the year they're back home in Galilee. So they would be your local rabbis, they would be your teachers in your communities. And then they'd go for 2 weeks to go work in the temple and then come back to live in the Galilee.
So
Once they're alive.
No, once a year. Once in a lifetime they get the opportunity to do certain things in the temple, like cleaning the ashes off the altar, or if you're a Kohen, going in to clean the incense altar, which is the story of old, what's his name, Zechariah. Remember that story where he became mute? Yeah. So that's once in a lifetime opportunity to get that job. But you still have to go every year for your family's 2 weeks that you work in the temple.
Okay.
So the Maser Kesafim is a controversial topic in Judaism.
Yeah.
Right? But not in the Didache,
No. Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, concerning the resident teachers and prophets in a community, when I was at university, there was some guy who graduated and then he decided that he is going to be a teacher or a preacher to some community. So off he went. Right? He says, I'm going to forsake all of this kind of stuff, I'm going to do the Lord's work. Right? So he went to this community. Now, a year later, and he had just gotten married, by the way, as well. So a year later, I think they had to abandon that effort.
Oh.
All right. The reason why they had to abandon the effort, I said, so what happened? I thought the Lord was calling you, right? So he was saying, well, it's kind of like this. The people were very poor, right? And in the first few months, we spent all of our money on them, right?
Oh.
And, on them. So there's nothing that they can give to us, and then we have to eat too, and there's like all of this work that you have to do, and they couldn't sustain themselves. So now let's say that there's like a community of like 5 people in this area, and then 5 prophets and teachers decide to make their home. What are you going to do?
That's too many.
Right?
I said, nice try.
Yeah. So if the teacher and the prophet doesn't realize that that's a bad system in the south, then they're clearly a false teacher. They can't figure that out for themselves.
They're not visiting. They stay.
Exactly.
They come. They've got their own house.
Yeah.
They stay. They're part of the community.
They can get out of the community if they can't think for themselves. The community can only afford. They can't even afford one. By the way, if there's 5 people, you have to go work somewhere else.
So typically, like in an Israel village or town or whatever, how many rabbis would be in?
In Israel today, every second house is a rabbi. People that have different jobs, everyone's qualified as a rabbi because after school you go to yeshiva and you go to university. So you get your qualification plus you become a rabbi as well.
So I'm just trying to think if this temple had to come back again.
Yeah.
So how would they know which rabbi you're supposed to do?
So with the temple, it's not to do with the rabbis, it's to do with the Kohanim.
Okay.
The priests, the people that are descendants of Aaron. So we know who the descendants of Aaron are. Every Saturday in Shul, they stand up front here and they bless the congregation. So we know they are. So when the temple gets rebuilt, we'll know exactly who's who, and then we'll have to look after them. They have to quit their jobs and work full time. Hey?
Who's who in the zoo?
Who's who in the zoo? Messiah will tell us, yeah. So that's how it's going to work then, yeah.
Yeah, because when I was first thinking of it, I was thinking, sure, this priest is going to get so much food and all that type of stuff. What does he do with all of it? But I could then
There's more than one, yeah.
but there's more than one.
There's a bunch of priests living among every community. So remember that we had those Levitical cities, the cities of refuge. There were 6 cities of refuge, but there were 42 other Levitical cities around Israel as well. So all the Levitical cities were around all the tribes. So that every tribe, wherever you live in Israel, you had your local Levites that you could be your tithing to and stuff like that, and they could be your teachers and Shabbos and all that stuff, and do all of the,
Cool.
blessing your houses and bar mitzvahs and all that stuff.
Such a cool structure.
Yeah, it is actually a cool structure, very well thought out.
But not like the 3 times a year you go for the main feast.
Yeah.
How busy does it then actually get when the temple? I don't know.
Maraba start end of the month.
No, I'm just trying to. I can't comprehend it. How long? I mean, everyone's bringing a sacrifice to be burned.
Yeah. So the Pesach, we know that we actually have a number. Josephus gives us a number of the one Pesach. How many hundreds of thousands of sheep were offered on that one day? That's why they specifically split up the Pesach offering into 3 sessions. You had to register to bring it. Eventually they realized that we need to get some logistics here. So they made you register for when you're going to bring it, and then they would plan it out. How many you're going to do in the first session, how many in the second session, how many in the third session. And they made it all fit then. So they'll make it fit again. They'll have a nice Excel spreadsheet. The temple gets rebuilt, and then you'll have to register your name there.
My mind can't comprehend.
Can you imagine? So I'll have to Google it. They call it the Pesach of, I think something like 300,000 sheep, something like that. 900,000 maybe even. I can't remember the number exactly. But yeah, that was back then. Population's gotten a lot bigger now.
But then I presume that they give a whole bunch. It's not just one altar they're busy burning it on. Then there must be a whole bunch of altars.
No, the altar is giant. The altar was big.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they could burn like 1 year. So it was like a spit braai. It was a braai fest.
Yes, but cleaning up all those ashes.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
That was a Kohan's job.
Yeah. It's a good thing we got so many Kohen then to do it. Now that's the interesting thing to think about, the logistics of that and all the blood. So they actually had a system in the second temple where they would flood the floor. So once everyone was done with their offerings for the day, they would open up the storage of the water and they would flood the entire floor of the temple so that all the blood gets picked up and drained out the other side. So that's how they would clean it every day. And one of the miracles... Yeah, that's one of the miracles. It never smelled and there was never a fly in the temple. With all that meat, there was never one fly in the temple.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, clearly it's not in South Africa. Right? Flies have already started. Have you seen them in your houses?
Yeah.
And the mosquitoes as well.
I saw one or two. Luckily, they haven't bit me yet. You have to fly.
We have to fly.
Okay. Yeah,
Without
'cause the rugby's
fly.
starting now, you see.
And Moses wants to knock off.
And the kiwi can't fly.
Yeah.
There we go.
Here we go.
Alright, guys.
Moses wants to close the yolk.
Is there a PDF version of the Way of Life?
This whole book?
No, buy it.
No, but there is a PDF version of the translation of the text.